My name is Claire Donovan, and I was 28 years old the afternoon my father called me into his office at Donovan Memorial Hospital to tell me I was no longer his daughter. He sat behind the mahogany desk his father had used before him, in the corner office overlooking the surgical wing that bore our family name, and he said that a Donovan who married a medical resident with nothing to his name had chosen poverty over legacy. My mother stood by the window in her cashmere cardigan and told me I'd embarrassed 3 generations of physicians who'd built this hospital from nothing. My brother, Trevor, the chief of cardiology at 35, handed me a folder containing papers he'd already filed with the family attorney. Inside was my removal from the Donovan Medical Trust, from the hospital board I'd served on since I was 23. From every committee and foundation my family controlled. "You'll keep your trust fund disbursements until you're 30, Trevor said, reading from the document like it was a patient chart. "After that, you're on your own. That gives you 2 years to reconsider." I was wearing my engagement ring, 3 months engaged to a man they'd met exactly once and dismissed in under 10 minutes. A man who was at that moment finishing a 72-hour shift in the ER at County General, probably surviving on vending machine coffee and whatever food the nurses had smuggled in. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't say a single word for almost 90 seconds while my father waited for me to choose them over him. But here's what none of them knew. The medical resident they'd spent 3 months calling that poor boy with no prospects wasn't going to stay poor. He wasn't going to stay unknown. And he wasn't going to stay in the background of medicine while Donovans stood in the spotlight. 7 years from that afternoon, my family would see his name on the new pediatric research wing at the hospital they thought belonged to them. They'd see it in granite letters 8 feet high, dedicated by grateful families whose children he'd saved. And I would be standing next to him, not as the disgraced Donovan daughter, but as Dr. Claire Donovan Chen, Director of Research Ethics, watching my father's face as he understood exactly what and who he'd thrown away. What happened in those 7 years, and what my mother said to me when she finally saw the name on that wall, is the reason I'm sitting here now, 10 years later, telling you any of this. Welcome back to Calm Stories QX, where we tell real-life stories about love, class, and the moment someone finally stopped shrinking to fit into a family that measured worth in stock portfolios instead of character. If you've ever been told the person you love isn't good enough because of their bank account, or if you've ever had to choose between family approval and your own heart, this one is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe. Because the moment my father shook my husband's hand at the dedication ceremony, not knowing who he was until the program started, is worth every second of this story. My father's office at Donovan Memorial smelled like leather and antiseptic and old money, which is a very specific combination that I'd known my entire life. The hospital had been founded by my great-grandfather in 1952, a modest community clinic that had grown over 3 generations into a major medical center. The Donovan name was on 3 wings, a research center, and the quarterly newsletter that went out to 50,000 end donors. We weren't just doctors, we were an institution. And I'd been raised to understand that being a Donovan came with responsibilities that other people didn't have. "We're stewards," my father used to tell me when I was small, walking me through the hospital corridors before dawn, showing me the plaques with our family name. "We don't just practice medicine. We preserve a legacy." I'd believed him. I'd gone to the right schools, earned the degrees, joined the boards, attended the galas. I'd done everything a Donovan daughter was supposed to do. Until I'd met Daniel Chen and realized that everything I'd been taught about worth was wrong. The meeting where they cut me off took place 3 days after I'd told them I was engaged. 3 days of my mother calling me repeatedly, my father scheduling urgent meetings, Trevor sending increasingly aggressive texts about family loyalty. I'd known what was coming. But knowing didn't make it easier. My father had arranged the office like a courtroom. He sat at the desk, judge's bench. My mother stood to his right, witness stand. Trevor was positioned near the door, bailiff, there to enforce whatever verdict had already been decided. And I sat in the chair across from my father, the one where patients' families sat when they received bad news. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "We've tried to be understanding," my father began, and I noticed he didn't use my name. That was the first sign. "We've given you time to think this through. But it's clear you're determined to make a mistake that will affect this entire family." "Daniel isn't a mistake," I said quietly. "Daniel," my mother said. And the way she pronounced his name made it sound like a diagnosis, is a first-generation medical resident with $180,000 in student debt, no family connections, and no prospects beyond a salary that will barely cover his loan payments. She'd done research. Of course she had. He's a second-year resident, I said. He's learning. He's brilliant. He's poor, Trevor interrupted. And he's using you to climb a ladder he'd never reach on his own. That stopped me cold. You think Daniel is with me for your money? For the Donovan name, my father corrected. For the connections, the opportunities, the doors that open when people know who you are. Claire, you're not naive. You understand how this works. I looked at my father, a cardiologist who'd inherited his position from his father, who'd had his med school paid for by a trust fund, who'd never worked a shift in a county hospital or struggled to pay rent while studying 4 boards. And I thought about Daniel, who'd put himself through undergrad working 3 jobs, who'd taken out massive loans for medical school, who studied on the subway between shifts because he couldn't afford to live close to the hospital. I understand exactly how this works, I said. You're afraid he's not good enough for our family. But what you mean is, he's not rich enough. That's reductive, my father said. It's accurate. My mother sat down in the chair next to mine, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Chanel, the same one she'd worn my entire life. Sweetheart, she said, and her voice had gone soft, the voice she used with terminal patients' families. We're not trying to hurt you, we're trying to protect you. This hospital, this family, it comes with expectations. We marry people who understand that world, who bring something to the table. Daniel brings himself, I said. That's not enough. 3 words, delivered gently like medicine, that's not enough. I looked at my mother, who'd married my father when she was 23. Fresh out of a nursing program she'd never used because Donovan wives didn't work. They volunteered and hosted and looked beautiful at fundraisers. It is for me, I said. Trevor made a sound of frustration and stepped forward with the folder. Then you're choosing him over this family, Trevor said. Over your position at this hospital, over your inheritance, over everything we've built. I'm not choosing him over you, I said. I'm choosing a life where love matters more than tax brackets. My father stood up. Meeting over. Then you'll do it without our support, he said, financial, social, or otherwise. You'll keep the quarterly disbursements from your trust until you're 30, as the terms require. After that, unless you've corrected the situation, you're on your own. Corrected this situation. Like my engagement was a medical error to be fixed. We'll revisit this in 2 years, my mother added, and I understood what she wasn't saying. We expect you to fail. We expect poverty to change your mind. I took the folder from Trevor's hands. Inside were documents removing me from everything. The hospital board, the foundation, the holiday card list, the family group text. It was comprehensive. They'd been planning this for weeks. If that's what you want, I said. It's not what we want, my father said. It's what you've forced us to do. I stood up. I looked at the 3 of them. My father in his white coat with chief of surgery embroidered on the pocket. My mother in her designer cardigan. My brother with his watchful, calculating expression. And I thought about the apartment Daniel and I were moving into next month, the tiny 1-bedroom in a neighborhood none of them would visit, where we'd be happy in a way they'd never understand. I'll be fine, I said. We'll see, my mother said. And I walked out of that office, out of that hospital, and into a life my family was absolutely certain would break me. They had no idea. I need to take you back 18 months before that office. To the night I met Daniel Chen in the emergency room at County General. I wasn't supposed to be at County. Donovans didn't set foot in county hospitals. We worked at Donovan Memorial, the private hospital, where patients had insurance and the floors were clean, and nobody ever waited more than 20 minutes. But I'd been asked to consult on a research ethics case by a colleague who'd moved to County to work with underserved populations, and I'd gone because the case was interesting and because, if I was honest, I was bored with the carefully managed medicine at my family's hospital. I was waiting in the consultation room, reviewing files, when someone burst through the door looking for a crash cart. Sorry, wrong room, he said, already turning to leave, and then he stopped. Turned back, looked at me. Are you waiting for someone? He asked. Dr. Martinez, I said, ethics consult. She's in surgery, unexpected complication. She asked me to tell you she'll be another 2 hours. I checked my watch. It was already 9 p.m. I'm Daniel, he said, 2nd-year resident. I can show you where the decent coffee is if you want to wait. I should have left. I had charts to review at home. But there was something about the way he'd asked. Not like he was hitting on me, just like he noticed I was a person who might want coffee. That would be great, I said. He led me through the maze of County General's basement corridors to a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. The coffee was, as promised, Decent, or at least better than I'd expected. We sat at a plastic table covered in old medical journals, and I learned that Daniel Chen was 29, 3 years into a 5-year emergency medicine residency, and the kind of doctor who talked about patients like they were people instead of cases. We had a guy come in tonight, he said, stirring his coffee. Homeless, looked like he'd been on the streets for years. Infected leg wound, probably needed amputation. But he was more worried about his dog than his leg. Kept asking if someone would feed his dog. Did someone? I asked. Yeah, Daniel said. I called animal services, found a foster that would take him temporarily, and the patient finally let us treat him once he knew his dog was okay. That's not in your job description, I said. Neither is half of what we do here, Daniel said. But if you want people to trust you with their lives, you have to care about their lives, all of it, not just the part that shows up on the imaging. I'd been practicing medicine, or adjacent to it, in medical ethics for 6 years, and I'd never heard a resident talk that way. Most residents at Donovan Memorial talked about patients in terms of presentations, complications, and billing codes. Daniel talked about a man's dog. Where did you do your undergrad? I asked, falling into the familiar script of medical small talk. State school, he said. Full ride. Then med school at Commonwealth on loans. Commonwealth was a good school, not prestigious, but solid. Where are you hoping to end up after residency? I asked. He shrugged. Wherever they need ER doctors. Probably stay in underserved medicine. It's where I feel useful, not wherever pays the most, or wherever has the best research opportunities. Wherever they need me. We talked until Dr. Martinez finally emerged from surgery at 11, apologetic and exhausted. I did the consult in 15 minutes. It was straightforward, and then I found myself walking to the parking lot with Daniel, who'd finished his shift. Thanks for the coffee, I said. Anytime, he said. If you're ever back here, look me up. I went back the following week, and the week after that. I told myself it was about the research collaboration with Dr. Martinez. But it was really about the 20 minutes I'd spend in the break room with Daniel before our meetings, talking about everything except the things my family talked about at dinner. We talked about medicine as service instead of status. About patients whose names he remembered months later. About the ethics of healthcare in a system that priced people out of survival. 3 months in, Daniel asked me to dinner. Like, a real dinner, he clarified. Not the hospital cafeteria. Somewhere with actual plates. He took me to a Thai place near his apartment. The kind of restaurant where the menu was laminated and the food was incredible, and the bill for both of us was $32. I'd had first dates at restaurants where the wine cost more than that. This was better. Can I ask you something? Daniel said over pad thai. Sure. Why do you keep coming back to county? Your colleague said you work at Donovan Memorial. That's like the country club of hospitals. I set down my fork. Honestly? Because I feel more like a doctor there than I do at my family's hospital. Your family's hospital, and that's when I told him. About my great-grandfather, my father, the wings and the plaques, and the weight of being a Donovan. I waited for the reaction I usually got from people when they learned my last name, the subtle recalculation, the shift in how they spoke to me, the awareness of what knowing me could mean for their career. Daniel just nodded. That sounds heavy, he said. It is. Do you like it? The ethics work? I like the thinking, I said. I like working through complex problems. But I don't know if I like where I do it. Everything at Donovan Memorial is so managed. We're more worried about liability than about what's right. Come work at county, he said, smiling. We can't afford to worry about liability. We're too busy keeping people alive. He was joking. But part of me wondered what that would be like. We dated for 6 months before I introduced him to my family. 6 months of dinners and walks and late-night conversations where Daniel told me about his mother, who'd immigrated from Taiwan and worked 2 jobs to put him through school. About his father, who'd died when Daniel was 15. About the scholarship that had saved him and the debt that had nearly broken him. He told me about choosing emergency medicine because he'd watched his father die in an ER where the staff didn't speak Mandarin and his mother couldn't explain what was wrong. I want to be the doctor who knows what it's like, he said. To feel helpless, to not have resources, to need someone to just see you. Fell in love with him in increments. Small moments that added up to something immovable. The way he remembered every patient's name. The way he called his mother every Sunday. The way he split every bill exactly in half, not because he was cheap, but because he wanted us to be equals. When he met my family 6 months in, it was at a Donovan Memorial fundraising dinner. I'd warned him what to expect. They're going to ask about your pedigree, I'd said. where you went to school, who your family is, what your specialty plans are. It's like a job interview. Got it, Daniel said. I'll be charming. He was charming. He was polite, articulate, perfectly appropriate, and my family dismissed him in under 10 minutes. I watched my mother's face when I introduced him as a county general resident. I saw the calculation, the assessment, the verdict. Not good enough. My father asked him 3 questions. Where did you undergraduate? What does your father do? What are your plans after residency? Daniel answered honestly. State school. My father died when I was 15. I want to work in underserved communities. My father nodded, said I see, and spent the rest of the evening talking to everyone except Daniel. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet. They hated me, he finally said. They didn't hate you, Claire. Your dad looked at me like I was a medical student who'd shown up to the wrong lecture. He wasn't wrong, I'm sorry, I said. Don't be, he said. I knew what this was, I just hoped maybe. I don't know. That who I was would matter more than where I came from. It matters to me, I said. I know, he said, and he took my hand. That's enough. 3 months later, he proposed. We were in his apartment, our apartment by then, since I'd moved in over my mother's protests. He'd made dinner, cheap pasta and cheaper wine, and we were eating on his second-hand couch. Marry me, he said, not a question, a statement. I looked at him, this man who'd worked for everything he had, who'd never asked me for a single thing except my time, who loved me without needing my last name. Okay, I said. We got engaged with a ring he'd saved for over 4 months to buy, a simple band with a small diamond that he'd picked out himself. It was perfect. I called my parents that night. We need to talk, my mother said. That talk became the office meeting, the folder, the cutoff. The first 2 years after my family cut me off were a crash course in living like a normal person, and I mean that in the best and worst ways. Daniel and I got married 6 months after the office meeting, at a courthouse with 2 friends as witnesses. I wore a white dress I'd found on sale. Daniel wore the same suit he'd worn to the fundraising dinner. We had a reception at the Thai restaurant where we'd had our first date. 20 people, catered buffet, a cake from the grocery store bakery. My family wasn't invited. That hadn't been a hard decision. They'd made it clear they wouldn't come even if I asked. But Aunt Jo came. My father's sister, who'd always been the odd one out in a family of surgeons because she'd chosen pediatrics and community clinics instead of private practice and prestige. She hugged me and whispered, "Your grandfather would have loved him." And I believed her. My grandfather, the one who'd founded the hospital, had been a country doctor first. He'd understood that medicine was about people, not portfolios. Daniel and I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where the rent was manageable on our combined income. His resident salary and my salary from a new position I'd taken at County General, managing research ethics. I'd left Donovan Memorial entirely. That had been my choice, not theirs. But I'd left knowing it would make my mother furious, and I was right. She'd called once after my wedding, not to congratulate me but to ask, "How long are you going to keep this up?" "It's not a performance, Mom," I'd said. "This is my life." "It's poverty," she'd said. "You're living in poverty to prove a point." We weren't living in poverty. We were living on $85,000 a year combined, which was more than most people had. But to my mother, anything less than the Donovan lifestyle was deprivation. I didn't argue. I just stopped answering her calls. The trust fund disbursements continued, $3,000 a month, as the terms required until I turned 30. I wanted to refuse them, but Neil convinced me otherwise. "That's your money," he said, "not theirs. Don't let pride cost you something you earned." I hadn't earned it. I'd been born into it. But I understood his point. We put the money into savings. Didn't touch it. Just let it accumulate as a safety net while I figured out how to build a life on what we actually made. And we did figure it out. We learned to budget, to meal prep, to find free things to do on weekends, hiking trails, library lectures, museum days when admission was discounted. I learned to cut my own hair. Daniel learned to fix our constantly breaking dishwasher. We learned what we actually needed versus what we'd been taught to want. And here's the thing nobody tells you about stepping away from wealth. It's hard, but it's also clarifying. For the first time in my life, I understood what things cost. Not just in dollars, but in time, in energy, in trade-offs. And I understood that the life I'd been living before, the one where I never checked price tags, never worried about health insurance, never had to choose between fixing the car and buying groceries, wasn't normal. It was a cushion most people never had. Daniel already knew that. He'd lived it his entire life. But watching him navigate it with such grace, such lack of resentment, taught me more than any ethics seminar ever had. When our car broke down 3 months after the wedding and the repair cost $1,800 we didn't have in our checking account, Daniel didn't panic. He just started taking the bus to the hospital and picked up extra shifts to cover the cost. When I got sick and needed a specialist my insurance didn't cover, we paid out of pocket over 6 months, $200 at a time. These weren't crises. They were just life for people who didn't have a trust fund cushion, and we were fine. Better than fine, actually. Because every challenge we faced together, every problem we solved, every choice we made about what mattered, it made us stronger. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss some things. I missed being able to buy books without checking the price. I missed spontaneous dinners out. I missed the security of knowing that if something went catastrophically wrong, there was a safety net. And I missed my family. Not the judgment, not the conditional love, but the people I thought they were before I learned what their love required. I missed Sunday brunch with my father, where we'd talk about medical journals and new research. I missed my mother's terrible decorating advice. I missed Trevor's dry humor, the way he'd text me weird patient x-rays with captions like guess the foreign object. But I'd chosen Daniel, and I'd choose him again every time. The real shift came in year 3 when Daniel finished his residency. He was offered positions at 3 hospitals. One was at a prestigious private hospital in another state. Good pay, excellent benefits, research opportunities. One was at Donovan Memorial. My father had somehow arranged it, probably hoping that professional proximity would bring me back into the fold. And one was at County General as an attending physician in the ER. The pay was the lowest of the 3. The hours were the worst. The patient population was the most challenging. Daniel took the County General position without hesitation. That's where I'm needed, he said. I loved him for that. And I also understood, in that moment, that Daniel was never going to be the kind of doctor my family valued. The kind who maximized billing, minimized risk, and built a reputation on publications instead of patient care. He was going to be something better. The attending position came with a salary of $245,000, which after 5 years of resident poverty felt like an incomprehensible amount of money. We didn't change much. We moved to a slightly bigger apartment. We got a car that didn't break down every other month. We started saving aggressively. But we didn't inflate our lifestyle to match Daniel's new income, and that drove my mother crazy. She'd started reaching out again, carefully through Aunt Jo, asking how we were, mentioning that she'd heard Daniel had finished his residency. Subtext was clear, now that he's a real doctor, can we revisit this? I didn't respond. In year 4, something remarkable happened. Daniel's supervising physician at County, Dr. Sarah Okoye, was leading a research project on pediatric emergency protocols. She asked Daniel to join the team. I don't have research experience, Daniel said. You have clinical intuition and patient trust, Dr. Okoye said. That's more valuable than methodology. I'll teach you the rest. The research was focused on reducing pediatric mortality in emergency settings, specifically in under-resourced hospitals. Daniel threw himself into it with the same intensity he brought to patient care. 6 months in, they had preliminary results that were stunning. A simple protocol change that reduced pediatric cardiac arrest mortality by 18%. They published in the Journal of Emergency Medicine. Daniel's name was third author. My father, who received every major medical journal, would have seen it. He didn't call, but Aunt Jo did. Your father's very impressed, she said carefully. He mentioned the publication at dinner last week. That's nice, I said. Claire, I think he's realizing. Aunt Jo, I love you. But I need him to realize it enough to say it to me, not through you, she sighed. I know. I'm working on him. In year 5, Daniel was invited to speak at a national emergency medicine conference about the research. It was in Chicago, all expenses paid. I went with him. We made it a long weekend, stayed in the conference hotel, ate deep dish pizza, walked along the lake. Daniel's presentation was in a small breakout session, maybe 50 people. He was nervous. Public speaking wasn't his strength, but he did beautifully. Clear, passionate, focused on the patients the research would help. After the talk, he was approached by a program officer from the Breslin Foundation, a major medical research funder. We'd like to talk about funding a larger study, she said. Multi-site longitudinal real implementation science. Are you interested? Daniel looked at me. I nodded. Very interested, he said. That conversation became a $2.3 million grant, the largest research award County General had ever received. Daniel was named principal investigator. At 34 years old, my husband's, the poor boy with no prospects, was leading a nationally recognized research project that would save children's lives. I was so proud I cried in the hotel room that night, This is unreal, Daniel said. 5 years ago I was drowning in debt. Now I'm running a multi-million-dollar study. You earned this, I said. We earned this, he corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without you. That was the year my trust fund disbursements stopped. I'd turned 30. We didn't notice. We didn't need them. We were fine. Year 6 brought 2 things, a house and a letter. The house was a small 3-bedroom in a neighborhood we actually liked, with a yard and good schools nearby. We were talking about kids, carefully, hopefully. We'd saved enough for a down payment, and the mortgage was less than our rent had been. Daniel planted tomatoes in the backyard. I set up a home office. We hosted our first Thanksgiving. Just friends, colleagues, Aunt Jo. It was chaotic and warm and nothing like the formal Donovan Thanksgivings I'd grown up with. It was perfect. The letter came in January. It was addressed to Dr. Daniel Chen, and the return address was the Breslin Foundation. Daniel opened it at the kitchen table while I made coffee. I watched his face go still. What? I asked. He handed me the letter without speaking. It was an invitation. No, an announcement. The Breslin Foundation, in partnership with several major donors, was funding the construction of a new pediatric emergency research center at County General. The center would house the research Daniel had pioneered and expand it nationally. The estimated cost, $47 million. And the center would be named after the lead researcher whose work had made it possible. The Daniel Chen Pediatric Emergency Research Center. I read it 3 times. Daniel, I whispered. I know. This is huge. I know. We sat there in our kitchen, holding this letter that was going to change everything, and Daniel looked terrified. I don't know how to do this, he said. I'm a clinician. I don't know how to run a research center. I don't know how to manage this kind of visibility. You'll learn, I said. The same way you've learned everything else. What if I fail? You won't. But what if? I took his hands. Daniel, you've spent your entire career being underestimated. By my family, by people who looked at where you came from instead of where you were going. This is the world finally seeing what I've always. His eyes filled. I'm scared, he said. I know. But you're ready. The announcement went public 3 weeks later. It was covered in the local news, medical publications. County General sent out a press release, and my phone started ringing. First Aunt Jo. Claire, did you see? Then colleagues from Donovan Memorial. Is this your Daniel? Then, finally, my mother. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Claire, it's Mom. I saw the news about Daniel's research center. We'd like to talk. Please call me back. I deleted it. 2 days later, my father called from the hospital. I answered without thinking. Claire, he said, and his voice had the careful neutrality of a surgeon delivering a complicated diagnosis. I saw the announcement about Daniel's center. That's remarkable work. It is, I said. I'd like to talk to him about it, about the research. We're very impressed. You can reach him at County General, I said. I'm sure he'd be happy to discuss his work. A pause. I was hoping we could all have dinner, my father said, as a family, to celebrate his achievement. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of judgment, of conditional love. And now, because Daniel's name was going on a building, my father wanted dinner. No, I said. Claire, you cut me off for marrying him. You told me he'd never amount to anything. You said he was using me. And now you want to celebrate him? We were concerned. You were wrong, I said. And you never apologized. You never asked how we were doing. You never cared until it became impressive to know him. That's not fair. It's accurate. And I'm not interested in a relationship that's only available when it's convenient for you. I hung up. Daniel had heard the whole thing from the living room. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. They're your family. You're my family, I said. They're people I used to know who happen to share my DNA. He pulled me into a hug. I love you, he said. I love you too. But the calls kept coming. My mother, Trevor, Aunt Jo, trying to mediate. And then, a month before the dedication ceremony for the research center, I received a formal invitation in the mail. Not to the dedication, I was already on the list for that. This was an invitation to a special pre-event donor reception at Donovan Memorial Hospital, hosted by the Donovan Family Medical Trust in honor of Dr. Daniel Chen's groundbreaking research. My family was hosting a reception for my husband. I showed Daniel the invitation. Are they serious, he said. Apparently. Do they know we won't come? I read the invitation again. And then I saw it, the small print at the bottom. The Donovan Family Medical Trust had made a $500,000 donation to the Daniel Chen Pediatric Emergency Research Center. Oh my God, I said. What? They donated $500,000. Daniel took the invitation from my hands. Why? He asked. Optics, I said. This is a major medical story. Everyone's going to know about your center. And the Donovan family wants to be on record as supporters. That's gross. It's strategic, I said. It's what they do. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Do we refuse it? He asked. I thought about it, about how much good $500,000 would do. About the research it would fund, the lives it would save. About the fact that refusing it wouldn't hurt my family. They'd just redirect the donation and still get the PR benefit. No, I said. We accept it, we thank them publicly, and we don't pretend it makes up for anything. Are you sure? I'm sure. We RSVP'd to the reception. Yes, we would attend. Because I wanted to watch my family celebrate the man they'd told me to leave. I wanted to see their faces when they had to shake his hand and pretend they'd always believed in him. And I wanted Daniel to see once and for all that their approval meant nothing. We'd already won. The week before the dedication ceremony, I took Daniel shopping for a suit. Not at a consignment store this time. At an actual store where suits cost more than our first month's rent had been. This feels wrong, Daniel said, looking at price tags. You're about to have a research center named after you, I said. You can own one expensive suit. We found a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly. Navy tie, new shoes. When he tried it on, I saw the doctor he'd become. Confident, established, someone who looked like he belonged in rooms with donors and administrators and foundation presidents. I look like your father, Daniel said, studying himself in the mirror. You look like yourself, I corrected. My father just wishes he'd done half of what you've done. The donor reception at Donovan Memorial was scheduled for the evening before the dedication. A Friday night event in the hospital's main conference center, the room where my family hosted every important gathering. I'd been in that room 100 times. For my father's retirement announcement. For my grandfather's memorial. For board meetings and fundraisers and celebrations. Walking in with Daniel felt surreal. The room was full, maybe 200 people, all dressed in cocktail attire, all holding wine glasses, and making conversation in the specific tone of people who were important and knew it. I saw my mother first. She was near an entrance, greeting arrivals, wearing a navy dress and her diplomatic smile. She saw me, saw Daniel, and her smile shifted into something genuine and terrified at the same time. Hey, Claire, she said, and she hugged me carefully, like I was fragile. You look beautiful. Thank you. She turned to Daniel, and I watched her recalculate everything she thought she knew about him. He looked different than the nervous resident she'd dismissed 7 years ago. Older, confident, wearing a suit that said he belonged here. Daniel, she said. Congratulations on your remarkable achievement. We're so honored to support your work. Thank you, Mrs. Donovan, Daniel said. The donation will make a real difference. Please call me Helen, my mother said, and I almost laughed. 7 years ago, she'd refused to use his first name. Now she wanted him to use hers. We moved into the room, and I felt the attention shift toward us. People I'd known my entire life. Hospital board members, foundation trustees, donors my family had cultivated for decades. All turning to look at the young doctor who'd built something extraordinary from nothing. My father approached, Trevor behind him. Claire, my father said. He kissed my cheek, formal and careful. Then he extended his hand to Daniel. Dr. Chen, it's an honor. Dr. Chen, not Daniel. A title. Respect he'd never offered before. Daniel shook his hand. Thank you for the support, Daniel said. And for hosting this. It's our privilege, my father said. Your research is exactly the kind of work this family has always valued. Innovative, life-saving, focused on the patients who need it most. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying what I was thinking. You didn't value it when it was happening in a county hospital by a doctor you thought was beneath us. Trevor shook Daniel's hand next. Impressive work, Trevor said. I read your JAMA publication last month, the pediatric sepsis protocol study. Brilliant methodology. Thank you, Daniel said. We were swept into conversations after that. Donors wanting to meet Daniel, hospital administrators asking about the research, foundation people discussing future collaborations. Daniel handled it all gracefully, answering questions, explaining the work, giving credit to his team. I stayed at his side, watching my family watch him, and I saw the exact moment they understood what they'd lost. It wasn't when Daniel explained the research. It was when Dr. Okoye, his mentor, approached and hugged him. There he is, she said. The man who's going to change pediatric emergency medicine. I'm just building on your work, Daniel said. Don't be modest, Dr. Okoye said. You've taken this further than I ever could have. I'm proud of you, she turned to me, and you must be Claire. Daniel talks about you constantly. He says you're the reason he got through residency. He did that himself, I said. No, Okoye said. He really doesn't shut up about you. Tells everyone you're the smartest person he knows. I saw my mother's face from across the room. She'd heard that. Because the thing my family had never understood was this. Daniel didn't need me for my connections. He didn't need me for my name. He just loved me. And that had been enough to build something extraordinary. The formal program started at 7. My father gave opening remarks. The Donovan family has been committed to medical excellence for 3 generations, he began. We believe that the greatest measure of medicine is not the prestige of the institution, but the impact on patients' lives. Dr. Daniel Chen embodies that principle. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. My father, who told me Daniel had no prospects, was now claiming him as an example of Donovan values. My father continued. When we learned about Dr. Chen's research, we knew immediately that this was work we wanted to support. Not just because it's innovative, but because it serves the communities that need it most. That's what medicine should be. And we're honored that Dr. Chen has allowed us to be part of this journey. Allowed us, as if they'd been there all along. Daniel was asked to say a few words. He stood at the podium, relaxed and genuine. Thank you to the Donovan Family Trust for your generous support, he began, and thank you to everyone here who believes in this work. But I want to be clear about something. This research didn't start in a conference room or a boardroom. It started in an emergency department at County General, with a team of nurses and residents and attending physicians who were tired of watching kids die from preventable causes. The room went quiet. We didn't have funding. We didn't have fancy equipment. We just had a question. Could we do better? And we decided the answer had to be yes. He talked about the first protocol they'd tested, about the nurses who'd helped design it, about the families who'd trusted them. The research center that's being dedicated tomorrow isn't mine, Daniel said. It belongs to every patient who participated, every family who believed in us, every medical student and resident who's going to train there. It belongs to the community that County General serves. He paused. Having my name on the building is humbling and terrifying, because I know that I'm not here alone. I'm here because I had a mother who worked herself to exhaustion to give me a chance. Because I had mentors who saw potential when I couldn't see it myself. And because I have a wife who chose to build a life with me when it would have been easier and more profitable to walk away. He looked at me. Claire gave up a lot to be with me. She walked away from comfort, from security, from a family that wanted her to make a different choice. And she never once made me feel like I owed her anything. She just loved me. That's what made everything else possible. I felt my eyes fill. So tomorrow, when we dedicate that research center, I want everyone to remember, the name on the building is just one person. But the work represents thousands, and the impact will belong to the children whose lives we save. The applause was genuine, long and warm. And when Daniel returned to his seat next to me, my mother was crying. Not sad crying, something else. After the program, after the mingling, after the donations were finalized and the networking was done, my mother found me near the exit. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just for a minute?" I looked at Daniel. He nodded. My mother and I walked out to the empty hallway, the one outside the conference center, where I'd spent so many years attending events I didn't care about. "I was wrong," my mother said. Just like that. No preamble, about Daniel, about what I said 7 years ago. I was wrong, I waited. We thought, that you were making a mistake, that you'd struggle, that you'd regret it. "I didn't," I said. "I can see that. I can see that you built something real. That Daniel is. He's extraordinary." "He is," I said. "But he was extraordinary 7 years ago too. You just couldn't see it because he didn't have money or connections." My mother flinched. "You're right," she said. "I measured him by the wrong things. We all did." "You measured me by the wrong things too," I said. "You assumed I couldn't be happy without the Donovan lifestyle. That I needed your approval to make a good choice. We wanted to protect you. You wanted to control me," I said. "There's a difference." She nodded, and tears spilled over. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for all of it. For cutting you off, for the things I said, for missing 7 years of your life. I'd imagined this moment for years. Imagined what I'd say if my mother ever apologized. And now that it was happening, I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired." "I appreciate that," I said. "Can you forgive me?" "Eventually," I said. "But not tonight. Tonight I need you to understand that your apology doesn't erase what you did. You didn't just reject Daniel, you rejected me. You told me my love wasn't valuable unless it fit your criteria." "I know," she whispered. "And I need you to understand that Daniel and I don't need you now. We're not here because we want your approval. We're here because you donated to his research. That's it." "I understand," my mother said. "Do you?" I asked. "Because you're hosting a reception for a man you told me wasn't worth my time. You're celebrating work you would have dismissed 7 years ago. And you're doing it because now it makes you look good. That's not." "It's partially true," I said, "and we both know it." She was quiet. I want to be in your life again, she finally said. I want to know you. Know Daniel. Be part of what you've built. Then you're going to have to earn it, I said. The same way Daniel earned everything he has. With time, with consistency, with proof that you mean it. I will, she said. I promise. I didn't know if I believed her, but I wanted to. The dedication ceremony for the Daniel Chen Pediatric Emergency Research Center took place on a Saturday morning in April, 7 years and 2 months after my family cut me off. The weather was perfect, clear, warm, the kind of spring day that felt like a gift. County General had set up chairs on the lawn in front of the new building, a beautiful modern structure with floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of thoughtful design that signaled, "Children matter here." There were maybe 400 people in attendance: medical professionals, researchers, foundation representatives, donors, and families. So many families. Parents holding children who'd been saved by the protocols Daniel had helped develop. Kids who'd survived emergencies that used to be fatal. They'd been invited specifically, given seats in the front rows because Daniel had insisted. They're the reason this exists, he'd said. They should be the ones front and center. My family was there, not in the front rows. They'd been given seats in the donor section, middle right. I saw my mother's face when she realized where she'd been seated. Not prominent, not honored, just included. Daniel and I sat in the front row with Dr. Okoye, the research team, and the Breslin Foundation leadership. The ceremony started at 10. The hospital CEO spoke first, talking about County General's commitment to serving all patients, regardless of ability to pay. Then the Breslin Foundation president spoke about the research and its national impact, and then Daniel was introduced. It's my honor, the CEO said, to introduce the man whose vision, dedication, and brilliant clinical mind made this center possible. Dr. Daniel Chen. The applause was thunderous. Daniel stood, kissed my cheek, and walked to the podium. He looked calm. Ready. Thank you, he said. All of you. For being here, for believing in this work, for caring about kids you'll never meet. He talked about the research, about the team, about the families, and then he said something I hadn't expected. I want to tell you about a patient I met 8 years ago. I was a second-year resident, working an overnight shift, and a mom brought in her 6-year-old daughter who'd been having seizures. I'd never heard this story. The girl was stable by the time I saw her, but the mom was terrified. She kept apologizing for coming to the ER, saying she was sorry for wasting our time. And I asked her why she was apologizing. Daniel's voice got quieter. She said, "Because we don't have good insurance, because I know this costs money, because I'm scared you'll judge me for not taking her somewhere better." The audience was silent, and I realized this mother thought her child's life was less valuable because she couldn't afford the right hospital. She thought she had to apologize for saving her daughter. Daniel looked out at the crowd. That moment changed me. Because I understood that our healthcare system had taught this woman that her poverty mattered more than her child's life. And I decided right then, if I ever had the opportunity to change that, I would. He gestured to the building behind him. This center exists because no parent should ever have to apologize for seeking care. Because no child's survival should depend on their zip code. Because medicine is supposed to serve everyone, not just people who can afford it. The applause started again, but Daniel held up a hand. I need to say one more thing. About worth. About value. He looked directly at my family. When I was starting out in medicine, I was told by people who didn't know me that I'd never amount to anything. That I didn't have the right background, the right connections, the right pedigree. That I was too poor, too ordinary, too whatever. My mother's face had gone pale. And for a while I believed them. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong in rooms with important people. Maybe I should be grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity came my way. He paused. But then I met someone who saw me differently, who looked past my bank account and my debt and my lack of connections and just saw me, believed in me, loved me. He looked at me. Claire Donovan gave up everything to be with me. She walked away from wealth, from security, from a family that wanted her to make a different choice. And she did it because she believed that who I was mattered more than what I had. I was crying now. That belief saved me. It gave me the confidence to pursue this research. To believe I deserved to be in rooms where decisions were made. To understand that my worth wasn't determined by other people's prejudice. He turned back to the audience. So when you walk into this building, when you see my name on that wall, I want you to remember something. That name represents every person who was ever underestimated. Every kid from a poor family who was told they'd never make it. Every person who worked 3 jobs to pay for school. Every dreamer who didn't have connections but had something better, determination, compassion, and people who believed in them. The applause was deafening. Daniel stepped back and the CEO came forward to unveil the dedication plaque. They pulled the curtain, and there it was, the Daniel Chen Pediatric Emergency Research Center, dedicated to the belief that every child deserves life-saving care, regardless of circumstance.